Good morning. Today we're going to talk about Math 101 and in particular Section 1.8. So we'll call this the 1.8 online class covering Section 1.8 in our text. Now Section 1.8, Chapter 1, Section 8 is entitled Multiplication and Division of real numbers. And by real numbers, we mean any number indicated on the number line. All right, let's talk about multiplication first, right? To multiply two real numbers, well, let's consider the signs. We know that a positive times a positive is a positive value. Positive times negative is negative value. A negative times a positive, because multiplication is commutative, returns a negative number, and of course negative times negative is positive. All right? Very simply, a couple of simple examples here. Minus 8 times positive 5. Well, negative times positive gives me a negative result, negative 40, right? Negative 4 times negative 8 will give me a positive 32. Let's see, 0 times negative 2. Well, formally 0 is neither positive nor negative, and we should probably know at this point that 0 times anything is 0, right? Any product of factors including 0 is equal to 0. All right. Let's look at an example in the text. This is example 3 on page 61, if you want to look along, and we're asked to multiply two fractions. One is, actually both of these are negative, minus 1/8 times minus 3/5. Well, right away I know my result is going to be positive. Negative times negative is positive, right? All right, a little more formally than we have to, I would write minus 1 times minus 3 on top, downstairs, 8 times 5. And that will return, well, the numerator product gives me a positive 3, right? Downstairs in the denominator, I get positive 40. So just like I predicted, I've got a positive return, 3 divided by 40. Okay. Let's try part B. Part B asks us to multiply and evaluate 3/20 times minus 3/10. All right, now if I look to cross cancel here, well, 3 and 10, well, no common factors there. 20 and minus 3, no common factors there. So I'm just going to have to multiply across. And I'll get upstairs 3 times minus 3 is negative 9. And in the denominator, 20 times 10 is positive 200. This does not simplify. 9 is 3 times 3, and there are no factors of 3 in the number 200, so I can't simplify any further. This here is my final answer. All right, note, regarding the signs of negative fractions, the following are equivalent. Minus a over b, which is typically how I like to write most negative fractions, absorbing the negative sign in the numerator. I could also write this as a over negative b, could I not? Look at that first fraction. If I multiply top and bottom here by negative 1, yes, then the equivalent expression would be a over negative b, and I can even take that negative sign and put it outside the quotient process. All right, so what I'm getting at here is all of these expressions would be acceptable on test day, depending on your favorite form. I think most textbooks, most teachers, and I suspect most students would like to absorb that negative sign in the numerator, but it's up to you. All right, let's try another one out of the text. Example 4 on page 61. This is part A. Here the book gives us a string of products, a string of multiplications. And I'm going to be a little less formal about this right now. I see in this list of products, I'm going to have 3 negative signs, right? Negative times negative times negative will give me a negative, right? So right away I know my answer is going to be negative. Let's see if this pans out. I'm going to go left to right here. You don't have to. Multiplication is associative. But I'm going to do this first. Minus 5 times minus 3 is plus 15 times 1 times minus 4. Taking it one step at a time. 15 times 1 then is positive 15 times minus 4. And 15 times negative 4, of course I get a negative result, and 4 times 15 is 60. Negative, remember, a negative result, just like we predicted. All right, let's try example, or yes, in the same example, part B, example 4, part B. I gotta get a fresh screen here. Hang on. All right. Scroll back up. All right, here we go. Again, same example in the text, example 4, page 61. You've got another string of multiplications here. Minus 2 times minus 4 times minus 1 times 3 times minus 4. Well, if you've got an even number of negative factors in your string, of course you're going to get a positive result. Let's see if that pans out, right? Negative times negative is positive. Positive times negative is negative. And again, negative times negative is positive. All right. Let's take it a step at a time. Again, I'm going to go left to right here. You don't have to, because multiplication is associative and commutative. All right, let's look at this operation first. Negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. And I'll leave the remaining factors hanging. 8 times minus 1 is then negative 8 times the remaining factors. 3 times 4. Oops, I made a little boo-boo there. Three times minus 4. Minus 8 times 3 is negative 24. Times the remaining factor of minus 4, and negative 24 times negative 4 is going to give me a positive 96, or just 96 as the final answer. All right, we've done 3 or 4 examples of multiplying real numbers, in particular positive and negative fractions. Let's talk about division now. A little harder, and in some ways it just adds on an extra step. Now, division of real numbers. Let's see. Now, before we go on, let's say a positive over a positive. Refreshing our memories is positive. A positive over a negative value is a negative value. A negative value over a positive value is always a negative value. And of course, a negative value divided by a negative value will return a positive value. Just what you might expect from those rules for multiplication as well. All right, I want to look at example 8 on page 63 of our text. Divide and simplify if necessary. 3/7 divided by minus 12 35ths. All right, don't panic. Don't run to the calculator. By another, it's equivalent to inverting and multiply. Your earlier math teachers may have said keep, change, flip to get an equivalent multiplication problem. Now I'm going to look to cross-cancel. All right, cross-canceling, let's see. 3 goes into minus 12 -4 times. Cross-canceling the common factors there. And similarly, 7 cross-cancels into 35 5 times. All right, so I'm left with, in the numerator, 1 times 5 is 5, and in the denominator, 1 times minus 4 is minus 4. All right. All right, and again, I can absorb that negative sign in either the numerator or denominator. Zooming again. Or even take that negative sign and put it outside of the fraction process. Okay? Any of these answers are acceptable. I think most of us would probably pick that one. I think our textbook author would. All right? All right, let's talk about divisions involving 0, involving the very mysterious number 0. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's ask ourselves, what is 0 divided by 3? Well, I like to think of it like this. If you take 0 apples and divide them over 3 people, how many apples does each person have? Well, of course, 0. 0 apples divided over any number of people is going to yield 0 apples for everybody. So with that rationale, 0 over 3 is 0. So division into 0 will always return a 0. Now perhaps a little more mysterious is division by 0. What is 3 over 0? Well, if 3 over 0 equals, let's say, question mark, well, that implies, if I divide both sides by 0, that 3 equals 0 times question mark. And of course, 0 times anything, doesn't matter what it is going to be 0, and 0 cannot be equal to 3. All right, so hence we say 3 over 0 is undefined. Leads to a nonsense statement. So we kind of put this undefined label on it. All right. So simplifying it in words, I'll say this: division into 0 equals 0. In other words, a 0 over a equals 0, and division by 0 is undefined. Undefined. Okay? All right. I believe that makes it a day, so we'll call it a day here for this lecture, and this concludes section 1.8, multiplication and division of real numbers.